There is no toilet paper at Marks and Spencer in central Belfast. Canned soups and potato chips are also sold out except for one variety. Chinese or Indian ready meals in the refrigerator department? Nah, nothing. There are also gaps in fruit and vegetables. A sign hangs on the shelves for blueberries. We are proud to support British farmers. The only problem is, British farmers can no longer get their goods to customers in Northern Ireland. Here and there, this may be related to a lack of petrol, the great nuisance in the UK, but the empty shelves are not a new phenomenon for Northern Ireland. They've been around since the beginning of the year, since the kingdom left the European Union with almost full effect. Northern Ireland remained with one foot in the internal market, the border with Ireland remained open. And the result was whatever agricultural and industrial goods are now being delivered from London, Liverpool, or Glasgow must first be checked according to strict European standards. As a result, there were violent riots for a few days in the spring. Cars were set on fire, Molotov cocktails flew. Angry people protested outside the ports of Belfast and Larne. The Northern Irish Border Police had to increase the protection of its officers. The EU temporarily withdrew its employees completely. Since then, the mood has calmed down, but the practical problems are still there, and the next escalation is already in the room. Geoffrey Donaldson, First Minister and Chairman of the Democratic Unionist Party, or DUP, or don't understand politics, threatened in early September to bring the government and parliament to a standstill within weeks. His ministers would rather resign than carry out customs checks in the Irish Sea. Not only is it a Northern Irish conflict that can lead to a hot autumn, it also affects the relationship between the UK and the European Union. The British government adopted the position of the hardliners in Belfast in July and for its part threatened to unilaterally suspend provisions of the Northern Ireland Johnson Protocol. This is part of the Brexit treaty and regulates the country's special status. The EU is already preparing for retaliatory measures in this case. For the time being, London and Brussels want to sit down at the same table again. The EU Commission wants to present an offer in the middle of the month, possibly next week. It is about practical solutions to practical problems, it says there. A renegotiation of the protocol is still and will still be excluded. But London sees it differently. We want to achieve significant changes to the protocol, said the Minister for Relations with the EU, David Frost, in a video conversation with Brussels correspondents who were in Belfast to get an idea of the situation. The British government sets out its demands in July on 27 pages. Frost, who has been leading the Brexit negotiations himself for 2 years, chooses tough words. The protocol undermines the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, which from my point of view is complete bullshit, but the protocol ended the civil war between the Unionists and the Nationalists. He says it interrupted people's ordinary lives and led to political turbulence and social difficulties. But is it really so bad? If you ask Robin Mercer, the answer is clear. We have been trading in garden products for 80 years, but this is the toughest year in our history, groans the businessman who is dressed as unpretentiously as his customers that day. Everyone knows each other there, and some greet him on the way to the cafeteria of the Hillmount Garden Centre, which he is the third generation to run, and he was interviewed by a German newspaper. Some of the problems have to do with COVID. The shop was closed for the first 3 months. For the most part, however, Mercer blames the complex rules of the Northern Ireland Johnson Protocol for its problems. Plants? This is particularly tricky. The EU protects its internal market with strict checks to keep diseases out. Some products are banned, for example, seed potatoes. All others need a health certificate, even if they are only sold in Northern Ireland. What is once on the island can hardly be traced. In addition, import declarations are necessary, as for other goods. We are currently behind with 75 explanations, says Mercer. He always lacked any information, the name of a transport company, the delivery date, or the invoice number. The entrepreneur suspects that this is due to data protection. He doesn't know for sure because his inquiries at British customs regularly come to nothing. He has now hired a woman who is more familiar with the forms. Even so, the paperwork is so great that Mercer would rather pay a fine than continue to grapple with the bureaucracy. But that's not that easy either. Unfortunately, no one has been able to tell me how high the penalty would be, he says. There are two things you have to know to understand his anger. First, Northern Irish never had much to do with customs. Most of the companies only acted in the kingdom. Second, on a legendary visit to Belfast at the end of 2019, Boris Johnson promised that customs form could be thrown in the bin. There will be no checks on goods that circulate between Britain and Northern Ireland, the British Prime Minister announced shirt-sleevedly. Of course, the opposition was stated in exit treaty that he had just agreed with the EU, but still he lied to everyone. In fact, the first 3 months of this year, 20% of all import checks in the EU were made in Northern Ireland, even though only 0.5% of the total EU population lives there. It resonates when Mercer says, let's get rid of the protocol, we are part of the kingdom. In his garden centre, however, it doesn't look like socialism has broken out. The outdoor area is well filled with autumn flowers. Inside, the entire Christmas stuff is already set up. We now buy a lot of goods in the south, says Mercer, and he means in Ireland. He doesn't really like that. Prices have risen, but he doesn't have to fill out any forms. This also applies to seeds, azaleas, roses imported from the Netherlands and Belgium. The goods come by ship from Rotterdam. It takes longer than usual, but they come. Mercer expects that it will soon be getting half of its imports from the EU. Previously, it was much, much less. The business with garden furniture and grills, which are supplied from England and meet the tastes of the customers, is more difficult. He says, most of the suppliers have told us that they no longer want to deliver. All the trouble with the forms and the port, thank you very much, we're not interested. Northern Ireland is a small market with a population of 2 million. So big manufacturers can afford it, but someone like Mercer doesn't give up so easily. His son has just opened a garden furniture market in the northwest of England. He's now shopping for him and organizing the transport. Can you still earn money like this? Well, when asked, Mercer's facial features relax and he laughs and he says, of course. At least 200 British companies are said to have stopped delivering to Northern Ireland. Conversely, a third of the small Northern Irish companies have sold less than before to the neighboring island. 3/4 of the manufacturers reported negative consequences in a survey. And that's one side. And the other is the business world adapts to new situations at breakneck speed. Supply chains are being realigned to the south. Northern Irish companies have increased the value of their exports to Ireland by a whopping 77% since the beginning of the year. Imports from there rose by 43%. London is therefore complaining about trade diversion. From Dublin's point of view, on the other hand, it's just normalization. Because of the Civil War, there was hardly any trade between the North and the South for decades, which is now being made up for. From the Hillmount Garden Centre on the southern edge of Belfast, it's a quarter of an hour's drive to Stormont, the Northern Irish Parliament. You can see the classical building from a distance. It is enthroned on a hill. On the way into the city, the streets get wider and the distances between the houses narrower. You pass Protestant working class neighborhoods where the Union Jack is flowing in the wind, and Catholics where IRA fighters have been immortalized on murals. Belfast looks like an open-air museum of the Civil War in many corners. Even so, the conflict between Unionists and Nationalists is not yet history. Rather, it is mixed up with Brexit and its consequences. The three party leaders in Stormont have just made it clear that the Northern Ireland Johnson Protocol must be rejected and replaced with arrangements that fully respect Northern Ireland's position as an integral part of the UK. Two of the MPs are ready to talk. They want to explain what bothers them and what a solution should look like. Christopher Stelford represents the DUP in the constituency of South Belfast. In the Brexit referendum, the 38-year-old politician voted with full conviction to leave. Today, he says, "What I regret most is that I took the Tory party at their word at the time. Brexit means Brexit, as the Conservatives in Westminster had promised, a clean cut. In the end, that only applied to the British Isles, not Northern Ireland." Boris Johnson absolutely wanted to prevent the entire United Kingdom from remaining in a customs union with the European Union. To avoid a hard border on the Irish island, he drew it between the British and the Irish Islands. For Stelford, it now feels like his Britishness is being amputated. He gives a fine example of this, perhaps without realizing it. When asked what he misses most, the hobby gardener answers flower bulbs. Not just any, but a very special variety. The new rose in honor of the late Duke of Edinburgh. Stelford read about it in a British newspaper and wanted to order it. But the small print said, "No delivery to Northern Ireland." That happens more and more often now, he complains. But what to do? The DUP man could repeat his party leader's demand to simply terminate the unpopular protocol. But he doesn't. He says, an agreement on hygiene standards between the EU and the UK would solve many problems. And he's right there. Such an agreement on dynamic adaptation to EU standards would be concluded immediately by Brussels. But it is a red rag for the Brexit hardliners in London. They did not step out to submit to EU regulation again. Stelford himself understands that. For him it's always about sovereignty and identity. We live here on contested terrain, he says. Yeah, occupied one. But for his voters that is less of a priority, as he reports. They are annoyed by rising prices, missing products and packages that don't arrive because they get stuck somewhere in the bureaucratic jungle. It's starting to hurt, he says, fearing the greatest trouble if Christmas presents from Great Britain don't arrive. What he doesn't say is, many will then not only blame the EU, but Brexit supporters like him. That becomes clear when talking to the second MP, which the German newspaper did. Mike Nesbitt, a generation older, a member of the moderate Ulster Unionist Party, the UUP, which he led himself for a few years. In the 2016 referendum, he voted against Brexit. That was the biggest own goal that unionism has scored in 100 years, he says. The EU brought so much money into the country that all groups benefited from it. Nesbitt does not really want to get rid of the Northern Ireland Protocol, but rather reform it. Goods from Great Britain should flow into Northern Ireland without customs formalities, just like goods from Ireland. What if they are smuggled south across the border then? Then it must be severely punished, he says. We are bringing scammers to trial here. This idea is supported by London. Nesbitt would also think it would be good if products were finally labelled that are intended for the Northern Irish market. This is an old demand from the EU Commission to which London has committed itself several times. But so far, nothing has happened. In Brussels, this is repeatedly cited as evidence that British commitments alone cannot be relied on, and I say they cannot be trusted. Nesbitt has a clear stance on the threat by the DUP to paralyze the Northern Irish institutions. That would be devastating, that's totally crazy, he says, referring to previous blockades. It's not that long ago. And he says, at some point we will return to the negotiating table with our tails drawn in and find that there is less to distribute than before. That was the experience with the negotiations on the Northern Ireland Johnson Protocol. All along, there had been no functioning government in Belfast. By the time they put themselves back together, London had made facts. 2 unionists, 2 opinions. This is the new reality in Northern Ireland, where 56% voted against leaving the EU. Brexit has shaken the entire political system here, says Duncan Morrow, political scientist at Ulster University. Before that, the pro-nationalists were divided. With the unionists, there was only one People's Party, the DUP. Now three parties are competing there, while the nationalists are united because they all want to stay as close to the EU as possible. In the latest opinion poll, Sinn Féin, whose goal is a united Ireland, is lonely at the top with 25%. The Stelford DUP, on the other hand, only has 13%. It falls behind the UUP with 16% and a third party with 14%. Sinn Féin has good prospects of winning the election next May and for the first time since the Good Friday Agreement to provide the head of government, says Morrow. Then we could also have a political majority for the Northern Ireland Protocol. This is important because at the end of 2024, Stormont will be able to decide for itself for the first time what will become of the agreement. The nationalists are, of course, in favor. After all, they keep the border to the south open. The pragmatic unionists see it that way too. On the top of that, a political force has grown up that cannot be attributed to either of the two camps, the Alliance Party. It comes in at 13% in the latest poll. It is worn by secular, liberal Protestants who want a prosperous and peaceful Northern Ireland. People like Stuart Dixon, for example, who has been with East Antrim in Stormont for 10 years. We are a returning party, he says, for the return to the European Union. He calmly calls the Northern Ireland Protocol a child of necessity. It's not about sovereignty at all, just about fitting Northern Ireland into the EU's trading system. Many practical difficulties have already been overcome and the companies get help free of charge. We have one foot in the UK and we enjoy all the advantages of the European Union, enthuses the Liberal MP. And, well, not all. Freedom of movement for the rest of the EU is not there. And you have to be grateful to the EU for the strict hygiene rules, he says. They save us from chlorinated chickens from America. Dixon just smiles at the gaps on the shelves at Marks & Spencer. Most supermarkets have redesigned their supply chain so that they now get their goods from the south. Only Marks & Spencer slept through it. A visit to the Irish chain Dunn's confirms this. Full shelves, meat and sausages in abundance, just from Irish production. DUP man Stelford would probably go vegan rather than shop there. But most citizens can live well with Irish steaks too. Some unionists even admit that the quality from the south is better when it comes to the third Guinness, let's say. The EU Commission will include all of this in its considerations when it makes new proposals in the near future, and as I said, possibly next week. They are supposed to make things easier for the import of medicines, customs formalities, and the monitoring of agricultural products. In fact, the situation has already eased since London declared several transitional provisions permanent in July. Brussels accepted that. With goodwill on both sides and additional guarantees, one could probably continue like that. It only becomes difficult when it comes to the scope of the protocol. Boris Johnson and his Atlatus Frost also want to free Northern Ireland from the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. This is non-negotiable for the European Union. When it comes to the internal market, Luxembourg has to have the last word. And meanwhile, the minutes are showing a surprising side these days. The Northern Irish watched in amazement in the news as long queues form in front of gas stations. Motorists swear and customers buy in empty shops in panic. Well, not at their place, but on the British Isles. The government in London is fighting for explanations, only it must not have nothing to do with Brexit. Transport companies in Northern Ireland see it quite differently. They have enough drivers and enough fuel. They can refuel at any time in the south of the island. They will even get taxes reimbursed. Everything is precisely regulated in the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.